Can you please share your name?
My name is Dr. Jesse Turner, and I'm the CCSU Literacy Center Director. The earliest memory that I have of the library is when I was a child. My mother used to work during the day, and she didn't get home in time to pick me up from school. So my grandfather would pick me up, and he would take me over to the library. And it was a pretty cool experience in terms of, I say that I know about the library from the smell of leather and old men's shoes, because in the library, my grandfather is from Ireland, and in the library were a group of old men that came from all around the world, and the library had newspapers from around the world, and they would sit at this one oak table that I'm sure it would take 10 people to lift, and they would all sit around there. And so we'd have people from Spain, Mexico, Vietnam, Ireland, and America, of course, and they would just generally talk about the news of the day. And he would put me down by his feet and throw a book at me, usually a book that I could not yet read, but I wanted to read. The library was always a safe place. So there was another time in my life when my father had left my mother and we were housed in Insecure, homeless. Most homeless people are working, and my mother would work, and she would be thinking about what's more important tonight. Can I get us a single room occupancy hotel room? Can I get us a meal? Can I get us both? And it all depended. She was a waitress, so it depended on what the tips were like that day. But what would happen is I would go to school, and my grandfather was no longer around, and my mission was after school to go to the library. And the library was always warm, was always welcome. My mother's friend, I think her name was Maria was looking after me when I'd come to the library. Nobody else at the library got this. Hot chocolate and cookies. I got hot chocolate and cookies all the time from her. And she would watch me until when my mother got off the bus and came in and picked me up. But the library was always safe, inviting. And it was at that point, from about probably 11 years old. And I'm a reader at this point. So every book she'd give me, The Count of Monte Cristo, I'd be like, yeah, we're not reading that in school. That's really a good book, and all that stuff. We were reading a lot of abridged versions of novels, and at the library, there was no restriction. I could read whatever I want, and the librarian would feed me great books, exciting books, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, it's like nearly 700 pages. So for an 11-year-old to go through that, she knew he would be here every day, Monday through Friday. You read a little bit today, Jesse. You read a little bit tomorrow. You read a little bit after that. If you like, you could take it home on the weekend, or we could leave it here. And I used to usually choose to leave it there because when you're homeless, you could lose the book. So the library was a great place for me. It's interesting we talk about access, so we know that if I look nationally, we got budgets being cut in libraries all across the country. We got South Houston District saying that they're closing all the middle school and secondary school libraries. They're going to open up detention centers, so that's access. In school, that was my go-to. How do I stay out of trouble? I'm a ghetto kid growing up. You try to stay out of trouble. That's what you do. So if you went to the library, there was no trouble. So the school library, I could go there, I could read there, and librarians and me were always friends. It's like you're with the right friends at the library. Gave me access to a safety space. Same reason that I wound up coming to university. Tell people in the third grade, we took a trip to Rutgers University at the agricultural college. And so when we went to there, we went to see, and it was like the agricultural college. So there's little eggs with these little lights that would show you which ones are fertilized, which ones are not. Fascinated with that. But what did I notice? I grew up in a neighborhood where it's the time of the Vietnam War, and our older brothers, our uncles, our fathers were coming back with major addictions, major issues. The streets were unsafe. And so I went to Rutgers, and I remember we went into the cafeteria, and I would hold on to everything I owned because I'm that little homeless kid. So you hold on to, they might steal something from you. And they just left their bags there. They left their books there. They went up and got their food. So I knew that just like the library, universities were safe places. Yeah, access to safety, and yes, magazines and all that stuff. It was all free. So I'm the director of our literacy center here, and I have parents of multiple income levels. Some of them could buy anything, maybe. And others, if their car breaks down, they can't get their child here to our center because they might not know when that car gets fixed. So I tell my parents, I said, you don't have to buy one single book. You can go over to Barnes & Noble. You could go there, get yourself a cup of coffee, pull off a dozen books off that shelf that your child might be interested in reading, and just like my grandfather, let them sit by your foot, let them sit at the table, share a little hot chocolate, let them be immersed in books, magazines, and there's all kinds of things over there. So it's access to those things that are important. The research for libraries is Stephen Krashen and Jeff McQuillan. These are friends of mine. Their research says that if I want to measure the test scores of students, how well they do, then I need to talk about access to books in their classroom and in their local homes and in their communities. The more access I have, the higher your test scores. So I usually tell people we're spending money in the wrong places. If we were by my office door, you would see a portrait of Frederick Douglass. And Douglass is the one that said, once you learn to read, you're forever free. So we make a mistake in this country. We reduce reading to a set of isolated skills when we should be doing what Douglass did. When Mrs. Maud would no longer teach him to read because the master said, do not teach him to read because I will have to harm him. Douglass still persisted in learning how to read and writes the slave narrative in the U.S. that inspires a movement of abolition. When you read Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop from Ohio State, she talks about mirrors, windows, and sliding doors. And she says, if you want to motivate children to read, give them mirrors. And that means myself. So if I'm a young white kid, blue-collar city kid, give me the stuff that inspires me. If I'm black, I'm brown, girl, I'm LGBTQ, whatever it is, give it to me. So we do that in our literacy center. So that mirror is important. So we call it kid watching. A good teacher knows that the real data that matters, not the test scores. You watch your kids. You listen to your kids. You learn about them. So I'll give you the example. 2 Islamic girls in the Literacy Center, and it was right around Ramadan. I asked, do we have snacks in here? I'm always giving kids snacks. And I said, your daughters, are they fasting? And she said, no, they're not fasting. But what happens with those 2 girls is I start feeding them stuff. I start noticing. We just finished Black History Month. Then we did Women's History Month. And I said, do you know about the library in Basra? And they're like, Basra, what's that? I said, well, look in the book. It's Woman in a Hijab. She saves a couple 100,000 books in Iraq during the war. All of a sudden, I don't have to say this is a book about an Islamic person. I just need to share them. And they just went wild with that book. They said, you got any more? Then we did the House of Wisdom, which is about the second largest library in the history of the world in Baghdad. And they're like, wow, this is great. And I said, you also know about the Library of Alexandria, right? They said, what's that? And then it's another search. They start learning about this concept, and everybody else is learning too, because my other kids are like, well, who's the librarian at Basra? Children should see mirrors of themselves. I just did a radio show with Dr. Burrell. She's a famous, culturally relevant professional development person. She's a black woman who often talks about enculturating black lives into school curriculums. And she says, it doesn't really matter what the color is. Don't you know Frederick Douglass's character? It doesn't matter. So she would look at the librarian at Basra. She'd say, what was her character? The library was in danger. She risked her life. She saved it, brought books home every night. And that brings me back to Rudine Sims Bishop. She said, we need windows and we need sliding doors. So what are the windows? Rudine Sims Bishop says the windows are when I could read books about other people, positive portrayals of those people's lives. Then I will learn about them and I will come to respect them. So it's not only we need mirrors, we need these windows.
How long has there been an agenda to teach black boys and girls not to read?
How long has there been slavery? We've got public schools in this country for about 170-something years. And I can tell you, I studied the history of education. I could tell you right now, there's never been equity. When we talk about equity, we should think about that the U.S. spends $23 billion every single year more on predominantly white schools than they do on schools of color. So how long has there been an agenda to keep black children from really understanding the power of literacy? As long as Frederick Douglass and Mrs. Maud, her husband, told her, you cannot teach this blank to read or you will ruin him and I will have to harm him. So how long? It just goes back. When Frederick Douglass meant you'll forever be free, it's because he was going to find the North Star. He's going to find the geography that would bring him north. But it's also other things I might find in the LGBTQ community. I might find my identity there. Little girls in the Literacy Center love to know. I say, who's the greatest scientist in the history of Nobel Prize winners? They'd say, I don't know. I say, well, is it a man or a woman? And they'll come up and almost always they say men. And I say, well, then how come no man's ever won the Nobel Science Prize twice? But Marie Curie has. And by the way, her daughter has. And she helped the husband win one. On Friday on the radio, I had Dr. Rachel Gabrielle from UConn, professor of literacy, author of numerous books on literacy, and probably 60, 70 peer-reviewed articles. And she informed me of something about the science of reading, which is being pushed in Black communities right now. She said, Dr. Turner, do you know there are 6 approved reading programs in the state of Connecticut? And I said, yes, I know that. I know them all. And she said, did you know that 2 of them, when they were examined for being culturally relevant, were labeled as culturally destructive? Did you know 1 other came close to that label? I always say things are intentional. So I do have children that come to the Literacy Center. I always push what motivates you, what engages you, what excites you. Maybe I want to know about great historical figures, but maybe you just want to know about dancing or hip-hop or whatever it is. So I'm going to feed you that. I'm going to say, read what you love. And if you read what you love, you're going to get better at reading. So that's my advice to young children. With my undergraduate teachers, with them, they're content area teachers, and they forget the role that they have in literacy. So my tech ed teachers, they read stuff much more complicated than any of the text we read. If you have to break down an engine, I can't do that. Even with the text in front of me, even with the pictures, even with the diagrams, I probably ruin that engine for life. But they have to teach that. So I remind those teachers, the English teachers, the Spanish teachers, that you need to understand that it's not just reading, it's writing, it's listening, it's speaking, it's visually viewing, it's visually presenting. This is how we learn about the world, and this is how we express what we're learning about the world. For the undergraduates, I tell them, the only one that knows how your subject area should be read, your Spanish book, your tech ed book, your history book, your English book, is you. Don't expect a 15-year-old high school student to be able to read Macbeth the way you could read Macbeth. And then to the graduate teachers here, I'm selling them just what I told you before. Mirrors, windows, and sliding doors. And I didn't tell you about the sliding doors. The sliding doors there are books that do more than show us someone else. So sliding door book would be Ernest Gain wrote A Lesson Before Dying. And I remember that book because it was Oprah Winfrey's choice. And it's a book about a black man who is innocent in the Outer Banks in a black segregated school. And 2 mothers, he's being charged with murder. And everybody knows he's going to be convicted because he's black, you're guilty. And the one mother goes to the other mother and says, but my son thinks he's a pig because they said, you're going to die like a pig. And she said, I want your son. Her son was his teacher. I want you to go back there and teach him he's not a pig, he's a man. And that is a book that's transformative. And that's what Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop says. The hope for America is in transformative books. The ones that make you cry, the ones that make you laugh and sing, and you can't help but calling up your brother or your sister and say, hey, did you read this one? Yeah. First day of all my classes, I tell them the story of the homeless kid. I tell them about the kid that he slept on the wooden bench in the train station with his mother. And hopefully she brought back some food from the restaurant, and we slept on that bench. And when you were homeless in my days and you went to school, there was no free and reduced lunch. I'm 69. That program did not exist then. So in school, you didn't go to a cafeteria. You could either go home or you brought your lunch with you. Well, I couldn't go home because I had no home. And I couldn't bring lunch because I had no lunch. So how do I get the passion for education? There's a teacher, remember I talked about kid watching? Mr. Bass watched me, and Mr. Bass ate lunch with us, and Mr. Bass came in one day, knew exactly what I liked from listening well, and said, oh, damn it, I have 2 liverwish sandwiches in here. You know I don't really want 2. What am I going to do with it? And he said, Jesse, could you eat one of these for me? Do me this favor. Mr. Bass fed me for a year. When it was cold and I had no gloves, he gave me gloves, and always in a roundabout way. Look what we found in Lost and Found today. 2 brand new gloves. Look what we found. A package of socks. Look what we found. But always was in the Lost and Found, and by that point I knew exactly the Lost and Found wasn't lost, but Mr. Bass somehow would find something new for me. And that's why when you come to the Literacy Center, there's always some food out there. Because Mr. Bass fed me, I feed my students. And my passion, I'd say, goes to Mr. Bass. I had 2 previous years being homeless. I had failed everything in school. I was as big a bully and big as trouble that can be. You would not want to know me. You would not want to be my teacher. But when Mr. Bass, after that, I was like butter, melting away. And whatever he asked me to do, I would do. And from that moment on, after Mr. Bass, I was an A student for the rest of my life. First, we want to know who are these people that want to ban books. I think we know them. Hitler burned 20,000 of the rarest books in the Library of Berlin. The Romans mistakenly burnt Alexandria. Who are they and who wants to ban books? The people that want to ban them are the people that don't want to look in the mirror of themselves. So if I look in the mirror and I see the hater I am, I see how afraid I am, I see the coward I am. People need to know about the history of libraries. They were noisy places. They were places where we read the books out loud in there, and you checked me, I checked you. We had lots of conversations, debates, and the librarian would never say be quiet. They would be listening to the conversation as well and getting involved. But libraries have always been the houses of truth. And if we start putting limitations on the truth, then we start going backwards in time. And does that mean I have books that I don't want certain people's children to read? Maybe I do. I don't know. I'll give you the example. Dr. Moreland, high school teacher, Korean War vet, says to me, could you go to the library, Mr. Turner? And Dr. Moreland would say, okay, Mr. Turner. And you knew when he called you Mr. Turner that he was being serious. He said, could you go over to the library? Could you get me this book, Mike Kemp? I'm like, who? What's that book? Let me write it down for you. Go to the library, get that book, bring it back. Then I say, no, Mr. Turner, can you go back? I need the Communist Manifesto. Then we'll go back at that. And then he say, go back there and ask them for Dr. Moreland's book. Went back there, bring the 3 books. And Dr. Moreland would say, I am a Korean War veteran. We were worried about communists, but I will protect that book. He said, Mike Kemp, we're talking about Nazi Germany. I would protect that book in the library. And then, his book, of course, he's like, I'm a civil rights activist. Dr. Moreland was one of those very rare black PhDs teaching in an inner city high school. I think one of the best pieces of advice that I received, when you're a teacher, you're half preacher. And so I have ideas, I have biases, I have all of those things. I'm human, just like everybody else. But there was a time in my life that I thought I needed to be a brimstone preacher. I needed to preach loud. And Dr. Dorothy Manowski, whose picture's on the wall in there, who I shared with my students today, she is my hero. But she said to me, Jesse, you're not winning people over. You're scaring them. You need to learn how to invite people into the dialogue. And so I think that's the most important as a teacher. So I started learning that. And she said, you do that with children. You do that with your family. You do that with your friends. Or you're in the classroom. You're like a minister that says we're all going to hell if you don't do this today. And so that instantly changed the way I realized. I said, well, maybe I'm not always right. I'm not even half right half the time. But I should approach it in a way that let's engage in this discussion. Let's be invited into this discussion before I label you, before I call you something, before I call something out. Let's have a discussion. And that discussion will make all of us better people. Well, did they charge you to go into the library? It's free. Does anybody ask to see your ID? Let me check your ID. How old are you? Can you be in here? Does anyone ask you for your papers? Are you documented or undocumented? Well, libraries themselves are open facilities. And from time to time, there's some court cases over that, too. I think it's Moorestown, New Jersey, had a court case because a homeless man was using their bathrooms and washing up in there. So they wanted to remove him from the library. They lost that case. It's this idea that libraries are free. Libraries weren't always free, weren't always open public. Libraries were private collections. You had to be a wealthy, powerful. You had to be Charlemagne, the king of a nation, to be at a library. But somewhere, and I'm not certain when it happened, but somewhere along the way, after the Dark Ages, we started thinking about, could we make these books public? We go back, no matter how imperfect it is. Horace Mann is really considered the founder of public education in America. There will be criticisms, but the criticism I can't find with him is that he said, I want to create public schools good enough for the poor that are good enough for the wealthy. Why did he want to do this? Because it's a 30-year battle to get public education. Horace Mann, his famous quote is, be ashamed to die before you won some small victory for humanity. Public schools, public education was his thing. And his whole concept was, we're in New England. New England, people may not realize, was the most anti-immigrant section of the country. We were Whigs, we would do nothing, and they were against immigration. The Irish were coming off famine ships, and there was no Ellis Island. The major immigrants were Irish and German immigrants, and by the way, they filled up 90% of your prisons. But Horace Mann said this new population doesn't know democracy. We need to help them understand because their loyalty is to kings and queens. Libraries may be the pillars of our democracy. In math, we like to say when you do the 29th power, what's the 29th power? Would you take a job where you get a penny a day and we double it every day for 30 days? And almost everyone says no. But if you do the math, you'll be a millionaire at the end of those 30 days because 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, 8 becomes 16, 16 becomes 32, 32 becomes 64, and on and on and on until you have $1 billion. So that's the way I see that notion of 200 years. We can't put a number. How many people have entered into the Hartford Public Library? How many people could never buy a book? The old men that I said, my grandfather and them, they couldn't buy those newspapers. They went to the library. They were like, they give you these papers for free. And they used to try to put them back neatly and everything, but they were there all the time. And occasionally my grandfather said, if you're going to throw that one away, could I have it? I think about that. 29 power is infinite. So the power of the library, and this is a shame that I thought of before, that librarian budgets are being cut across the country. It is the biggest fear I have. If we lose our libraries, then we probably lose our soul. Like my legacy with the library, we work with struggling readers in this program. Nobody leaves my program a struggling reader. They leave this program a lover of books, and that means they'll be a lover of libraries. That's my legacy. I don't want to teach you how to read. I want to teach you to be free, like Frederick Douglass said. I want to teach you to love to read, because if I could teach you to love to read, whoa, you'll never stop reading. I don't think the public understands that we've been reducing budgets to public institutions for now about 40 years. It's a massive amount of money. So even our own library at this university tells me they are down $1 million in their budget, and that's a university library. So we'll just keep cutting. And if we do that, it's like I said before, you're cutting your soul.
Thank you for listening to 250 Stories, a production of HPL Studios at Hartford Public Library. This episode was written and produced by Christopher T. Brown, sound by Sam Sigmund, edited by Faith Lucas, and with photography and graphic design support from Hartford Public Library's communications team and the Hartford History Center. For more information on this project, visit www.hplstudios.hplct.org. New episodes release every Tuesday, so subscribe to stay tuned.